strolling through the forest. An elderly woman on the outskirts of her town one night discovered what she thought was an abandoned baby on the ground. She took it home and was determined to raise it herself. But a tragic series of events left her community questioning whether the baby, also known as Shanker, was even human. For outsiders who live in a more conventional world with its sophisticated technologies and innovations, life in the rural areas of Russia's vast Siberian wilderness must seem like a harsh existence. However, for the Russian people, living in these cold and remote environments is not all that different. At its most basic level, living in the Ural Mountains entails the daily routine of waking, eating, working, and sleeping, albeit in a way that conformist society would undoubtedly find completely alien, especially for those who are not used to the basic social conditions. This perception is only made worse by the extreme seclusion and lack of external contact that the native peoples are otherwise perfectly accustomed to, even though they have access to modern conveniences like radio and television. This way of life has been difficult for these people to give up because it is very similar to how their ancestors and forefathers lived their lives. But occasionally events occur that break up the routine of daily life when one odd event or sighting in these remote areas attracts the attention of the entire world and causes an unwanted stir of controversy to an otherwise unassuming populace. This was the case in 1996, when a startling discovery led to one rural community in particular being closely examined by the international community. The incident took place in the territorial district of Stem, a town located on the fringe of Chelyabinsk Oblast. At the southern toe of the Ural Mountains, the territory was once the site of Chelyabinsk Fortress. During the time of the Tsars, it was the epicenter of the Soviet Union's economic push during the Great Patriotic War to expel the Nazi invaders. The site grew to house key production facilities which produced tanks and armaments and boasted a population of almost 1 million. But the area's primary notoriety stems from its proximity to the nuclear research facilities that our Soviets erected during the Cold War in 1957. The Myok nuclear fuel reprocessing plant in Stem exploded, releasing a cloud of radioactive dust which covered an estimated 20,000 kilometers and contaminated the nearby Thei River remarkably. The town of Chelyabinsk was spared due to its distance from the site, but in the years that followed, dumping of radioactive residue in the river led to an environmental catastrophe. This caused some ecologists to claim that pollution in the region was responsible for numerous birth defects in the years after the disaster. And perhaps it was this incident that indirectly put the town of Krushtem back on the map, because ultimately it may have led to another scandal which would turn the collective scientific community on its head. As the story goes, one dark and eerily quiet night in May 1996, an elderly woman, Tamara Vasily A. from the Prosper in ER, was out walking in the woods just outside the town of Karla-Navi. When she heard an odd sound in the near distance, she headed towards it, thinking it could be a trapped animal. However, it sounded more like the wail cry of an injured child. As she got closer, she looked down and found what she described as a baby lying in the debris of the town's rubbish dump. Without a moment's hesitation, she scooped it up and wrapped it in a blanket, then took it back to her apartment where she determined she would raise the child herself. 2 days later, she was visited by her daughter-in-law, also named Tamara, and as the latter was just about to leave, the elderly woman suggested that they feed the baby together. This proposal surprised the younger woman, as Tamara Siniya had mentioned nothing of a child up until that point, but upon entering her mother-in-law's bedroom, she found something far beyond anything she could have expected tomorrow. Its head was twice as large as the rest of its body, and its hard, elongated features suggested that they were built into the skull. Its eyes, which darted back and forth at a frightening rate, appeared much larger than the nose typically found on a baby, and its pupils could widen and elongate like a cat's eyes do. It also appeared to have long arms and fingers, no visible genitalia, and no eyelids, according to Junius. The thing that shocked her the most was how it ate. She could only see a tiny hole in its mouth, and when it fed, it seemed to suck the food in instead of eating it. It had 2 sharp teeth, but she noticed that it seemed unable to chew, but it managed to eat the food rather quickly and wagged a long scarlet tongue at her tomorrow. Junior would later assert, with good reason, as we shall see when she has tomorrow, that the baby was not of this world. In the days that followed tomorrow, Nia was asked what the baby's name was. She said that she had given it the alias Shanker, or Little Alexei, perhaps in memory of one of her departed grandsons. The neighbors in her apartment block noticed that she was acting strangely, claiming to have a new baby, which they obviously didn't believe. They described her as acting erratically and occasionally evasive, especially when asked for more information about the child. One night, a neighbor heard the older woman knocking on her door, saying she was scared because her baby was sick and she didn't have any medicine to give him. The local police were called to her apartment, but they weren't there to help her. Instead, they took her into protective custody and transported her to a nearby hospital for medical evaluation. However, the reports insist that she was found by neighbors, who then discovered that she was seriously ill and that she was taken away against her will, claiming she had a baby in her room and couldn't be away from him. This resulted from the belief that she was in the early stages of a mental illness, which her neighbors and other acquaintances reported as fact in relation to her actions in recent years. They said that she occasionally exhibited strange behavior and was known to visit the local cemetery to steal flowers from graves and use them to decorate her home. However, nobody at the time seemed to realize that, with Toma Sr. away, this left little Aleshenka alone in the apartment. From this point on, events are uncertain and there is conjecture regarding the truth of what actually happened. But based on what has been pieced together, we are confident that Vladimir Bendlin, a PETA police officer, is at the heart of this mystery. Bendlin had allegedly come to the police station in the nearby town of Novogorod II to question a man named Vladimir Nurdinov. Nilda Knopf was a known criminal and petty thief who had been arrested in connection with an incident involving stolen power cables. As the interrogation went on, the policeman was shocked when he told him that he had a dead baby in his possession that he wanted to give to him because he had no use for it and had no idea what else to do with it. Bendlin consented to return to the novice apartment and examine the alleged dead infant. There he discovered what he could only describe as the dried-up, mummified remains of a small child, malformed and emaciated. The body was grayish, lacking any hair. The head was splotched with darkened spots, and the child was barely 10 inches tall. Bendlin asked me rotten off how he got this body, but once more, we can only speculate. He's supposedly near at the nerve-spent time in the apartment of Tamara Sr., and was present whenever she fed the early Shanker, but was out of town when she was detained for medical evaluation. He then returned and found the child having died of thirst and hunger, and took the remains back to his home, the sources say, adding that tomorrow, JR herself called Mironov to come and check on the baby with her, because it tended to frighten her when she was alone and found Alyanka lying dead. Dr. Leo Baramanova, a forensic analyst and clinical expert, said that her tests seemed to show signs that the infant's body and skin were not of a regular human child, but something entirely alien. She described numerous features that seemed impossible for a child to have even in severe cases of deformity or birth defects. Tamara handed the body to me Alton so that I could give it a proper burial, something he had apparently never gotten around to doing. What is certain is that Bendlin took the body away from Mironov and sought to have its DNA examined either to determine whether it was a hoax that could be written off or perhaps in the hopes of finding someone who might have been a relative. According to Romanova, the skull's shape suggested an abnormal elongation and it was made up of just 4 bones. The body was too short to support the head naturally, and the fingers were long and pointed. The head cavity was particularly sharp and pointed, a feature that no malformed infant Tamara had ever seen had shown her before. She put him mildly to Bendlin, who quickly learned that the baby was not human and could not have been a human child. The local press soon learned of the story, and a local television broadcaster contacted Bendlin to get information about the creature. This led him to record footage of himself examining the body, demonstrating its size in relation to Bendlin's hand as he moves and turns it over. Based on the way the body is seen, it is clear that no one had a clear idea of what this small entity was. As television and newspaper journalists started visiting Karlin Avi to learn more about the Kosh STEM alien, it became clear that anyone with information could be interviewed. There were even reports of locals who would confirm or sell any information they had for a good price, and many journalists took advantage of this. As a high-profile television program, MTV Japan featured an editorial on Shanker, and according to one journalist, they threw money at anyone who could tell them about the alien. Many locals even went so far as to accuse Tomorrow Jr., and Neil sufficiently planned the entire affair, saying it was all a ruse they had created to profit from. But the truth was that neither Tomorrow Jr. Perhaps most predictably, when more journalists and TV reporters arrived, more UFO experts hoped to catch a glimpse of the baby Aleshenka. Neither of them proceeded to sell information for financial gain at all, which appears to contradict these claims. When weeks turned into months and there was still no word on the results, Ben Linds's hopes for a conclusive answer began to wane. He had asked one of his assistants to take the body by car to a lab in another town, but when a large metallic craft suddenly landed in the middle of the road, blocking the vehicle's path, the assistant claimed that the craft's occupant stepped out and silently asked her to hand the body over to them. The assistant complied, and the craft flew away when asked to identify the location of the encounter. If this were true, it would appear that Shanker was reclaimed by his own people, and the case would have been permanently resolved if, not for the lack of credibility displayed by those who presented this story. Zolotov was unable to locate the place and declined to discuss the matter further. The only thing we know for sure is that the body of Shanker was never seen again. Other researchers speculate that Zola Toffler was intercepted by government agents and ordered to turn over the baby to them. One eyewitness even claimed to have been visited by an investigative team of an unknown group of people and told to sign confidentiality papers and not speak about the body anymore. Another theory is that Zolotov was actually approached by an eccentric collector who wanted to buy Shanker and sold it to him. When a woman approached Ben Lin in 1997 and claimed to have taken the original shawl Tomorrow Sina had used to wrap the body in and conceal it during the media frenzy, he assumed the case was over. She assured him that she would give the shawl to him for a complete DNA analysis, but only if he would look into it thoroughly, which he was more than happy to do after everything that had transpired. Ben Lin took the shawl to Tomorrow Jr. and had her confirm that it was the exact same shawl her mother-in-law had used to cover Shanker. With her permission, he took it to the Vavilov Institute of General Genetics in Moscow. Following years of intensive investigation, testing, and waiting, the results were finally inconclusive, much to the dismay of some. While the tests revealed no evidence of extraterrestrial origin, they did find traces of alcohol that suggested the baby had been washed or diced with the substance shortly before being given to Bendlin, even though the body itself was missing. Additionally, several organic material particles mixed with human DNA and flecks of female blood matter suggested a miscarriage or abortion. The circumstantial evidence that was present led the researchers to conclude that it could not have been anything more than an underdeveloped fetus. In April 2004, Dr. Irina Yermoleva, one of the initial researchers who had seen the body firsthand, recanted her original 1997 statement and declared that there was nothing alien about the body to her. The creature was no hoax, but a genuine mummified body that was once living tissue. She found that the state of the body corroborated with numerous cases of miscarried fetuses often found within 20 to 25 weeks of development. She claimed that she had counted a complete rib cage, an ample shoulder girth, and wrist bones, and whilst indeed the head was the spray-just aspect of the body, she explained that it could have been incompletely formed during development. In her expert opinion, Dr. Yermoleva stated that the body was deformed as a result of radioactive fallout, which had enormously affected the area of Chi Stem following the nuclear disaster in 1957. She believed the infant had been born prematurely, who was likely miscarried, and that the distraught mother might have abandoned it in the forest for Tomorrow Sr. To find, however, one person did not agree with this finding. The Talia Shanker was simply not of human origin, according to Leo Baramanova, Ben Lin's clinical assistant. She described the infant's body and noted at least 20 features that she said would not be common in deformed children. There were many differences in the head and a lot of sharp edges in the skull cavity, which she said were never found in children's schools. As a result, she insisted that human fetuses could not survive for more than a few hours after being exposed. Shanker had apparently lived for a few weeks before succumbing, And whilst the experts insist that Aleshenka was nothing more than an underdeveloped fetus, there is the testament from Tomorrow Jr. that the baby was alive and able to consume food, an impossibility for a human child of that age. Even so, the Kashta million was still making headlines in 1999 when Tamara Sr. attempted to flee the institution where she was being treated for mental illness one night in September. She was seen on a wooded road outside the facility. Attempts to hail her went unanswered, when suddenly, out of the darkness came a speeding car, running down and killing the elderly woman in what had looked to be a deliberate hit and run. Some conspiracy theorists suggest there was more to this death due to reports that she was going to be placed under hypnosis to recount the entire experience. Could she have been silenced again? We are left with more questions and few answers. And although the case may be closed, there is a newfound appreciation for the story, which now appears to grow with each recounting. What was Shanker? Was he truly an underdeveloped fetus, the tragic result of a radioactive disaster? Or was he an alien being found in a swampy marsh who lay dying, just as he was found and taken in by an elderly woman on the brink of a psychiatric disorder? Did the Russian government want it covered up to the point of threatening people? It's keeping quiet and even silencing the old woman as a final measure? Or have we simply read too much into what was probably a premature or aborted birth? Aleshenka's origin cannot be determined even to this day, despite a great deal of media coverage and continued interest in his story. Since his publication, it has been met with plenty of skepticism and an equal amount of credibility. At the same time, no one denies that something was found in the forest outside of Chistem, and then, whatever it was, briefly touched the life of an elderly woman who selflessly accepted it as though it were her own child. Though it is sad that we find no happy resolution to this case, we can always take comfort in the knowledge that, at least in this instance, we saw a rare and brief display of warm-hearted humanity, an elderly woman willing to take in and care for what most others would have rejected, whether Shanker was alien or entirely human, if indeed he was of extraterrestrial origin and was taken back by his own people. And if there is something that passes for an afterlife in that community, then it is our heartfelt hope that he found peace amongst the stars.